We've taken in trillions of dollars. And by the way, all these countries signed agreements, as an example. They're all happy. Everybody's happy.
New this morning, President Trump's efforts to reshape the nation's trade policy have taken a hit after a federal appeals court ruled that most of his sweeping global tariffs are unlawful.
In early September 2025, President Donald Trump continues to defend the tariffs that have defined his second term. He insists they are the cornerstone of America's economic strength, arguing that without them, the United States could slip into decline. Yet those same tariffs now face their most serious challenge. A federal appeals court ruled at the end of August that most of the global duties imposed under emergency powers are unlawful. The decision is stayed until October 14, giving the administration time to appeal to the Supreme Court. For Trump, this is more than a legal dispute. He ties the survival of his economic model to tariffs, portraying them as protection for trillions of dollars in new investment, especially in artificial intelligence. But while the president speaks of national survival, financial markets and ordinary households are bearing the real cost. Meanwhile, across the northern border, Canada is watching and preparing measures to shield its domestic market.
President Trump is touting what could be a financial windfall for the United States, but at whose expense? Is it American consumers? We've been talking to small business leaders about how the tariffs are affecting them. Most of them say that they are currently eating the tariffs, but eventually are going to have to pass on the cost to their consumers.
Support for tariffs has collapsed. A majority that once backed Trump's policy has shifted, and 6 in 10 Americans now oppose it because prices continue to rise. Importers confirm the squeeze. Companies like Fontana Forna USA face duties near 80% on containers of Italian goods and were forced to raise prices by 10% this summer. Economists are clear. Tariffs are paid by U.S. firms at the port and passed directly to consumers. The promise that foreign producers would absorb the cost has not materialized.
Canada, on the other side of the border, is charting its own course.
Relief for consumers at the grocery store and other small businesses may be on the way. Ottawa has dropped a number of tariffs on U.S. products covered by the CUSMA Free Trade Agreement.
Prime Minister Mark Carney's government announced in late August that it would drop most retaliatory duties on U.S. goods covered by USMCA. At first, this looked like a concession, yet it was a calculated move to ease pressure on households while keeping leverage in negotiations. Everyday grocery items such as coffee, tea, nuts, and pasta had carried a 25% surcharge. With that barrier gone, Canadian consumers are expected to see gradual price relief as new shipments arrive. Retailers caution that it will take time because existing stock was imported under the old tariffs. But the difference at customs is significant. Food inflation in Canada was running at 3.4% year-over-year in July, compared with a normal range of 1.5 to 2.5%. Reducing counter tariffs is meant to move that rate closer to stability. Businesses also note that U.S.-made furniture and other imports will become more affordable, giving consumers breathing room.
The contrast between Washington and Ottawa is now impossible to ignore. Trump has doubled down on tariffs as symbols of power, even as courts question their legality and polls show a public backlash. Prices for groceries, cars, and household goods keep climbing, leaving many Americans frustrated. Carney, by contrast, has moved quietly but decisively to reduce tariffs that were no longer serving Canadian interests. By lowering costs at the checkout counter, he is reinforcing consumer confidence while keeping channels of dialogue with Washington open. This is not a weakness. It is a strategy that turns selective concessions into domestic gains. Where Trump's approach is producing political headaches and economic uncertainty, Canada is showing how pragmatic adjustments can strengthen the home front and protect long-term negotiating power. The central message is clear. Tariffs may have been launched as a show of strength, but in practice, they are straining American households. Canada's decision to lower its own duties demonstrates that resilience comes not from clinging to a failing policy, but from adapting it to serve the needs of citizens.
Denmark is accusing the United States, one of its closest allies, of acting more like an adversary by conducting covert operations in Greenland.
Denmark and the U.S. are close allies, not only in NATO, but in many different fields. Friends and allies, they don't spy on each other.
Greenland has long been viewed as a strategically important territory for global powers. With vast natural resources and a commanding position in the Arctic, it has drawn attention far beyond its size. Today, the island is again at the center of tension. Denmark has accused the United States of running covert operations to stir division inside Greenland, a charge that has shaken one of NATO's closest alliances. Danish officials warn that such influence campaigns violate international law and trust among allies. At the same time, Canada is moving in a very different direction. Instead of pressure, Ottawa is strengthening ties with Denmark through green energy and trade cooperation, signaling that the Arctic is no longer an arena dominated by Washington alone.
One way or the other, we're going to get it.
Trump's focus on Greenland is not new. The island offers enormous strategic value, from military bases that monitor Russia to deposits of critical minerals. Securing Greenland would give the United States leverage in the global balance of power. Reports from Denmark's public broadcaster revealed that at least 3 Americans with connections to Trump or his administration were linked to covert influence campaigns. These operatives were said to encourage separatist sentiment and build networks sympathetic to Trump's ambitions. To many observers in Europe, this resembled Russia's earlier tactics in Ukraine, where local divisions were amplified before force was applied. Denmark responded by summoning the top U.S. diplomat in Copenhagen and opening investigations. The implications go beyond Greenland itself, raising doubts about whether the United States is undermining trust inside NATO, an alliance meant to prevent this very behavior.
Denmark and the U.S. are, like Canada, members of NATO.
The Danish public broadcaster uncovered evidence in a stunning investigation that men with ties to Trump tried to infiltrate Greenland, pointing to intelligence that at least 3 Americans with connections to the president were involved in covert influence operations. Trump has repeatedly threatened to annex the territory, which, like Canada, has vast critical minerals and strategic military bases in the Arctic.
While Washington's actions spark controversy, Canada is carving out a quieter but highly significant role with Denmark. Ottawa has been working with Copenhagen to build what some call a green trade corridor. In February 2025, Canada joined the Global Offshore Wind Alliance, a move that tied its Atlantic provinces to Denmark's world-leading expertise in offshore wind. Projects like the Toklu Wind and Hydrogen Development in Newfoundland and Labrador, backed by Copenhagen infrastructure partners, aim to produce green hydrogen for export to Europe. Denmark's concept of energy islands, artificial platforms that connect wind farms and hydrogen production, is already influencing Canadian planning. Beyond energy, Canada's aluminum sector is also gaining an edge. Because Canadian aluminum is produced largely with hydropower, it is among the cleanest in the world. With the European Union's carbon border adjustment mechanism set to take effect in 2026, aluminum produced with fossil fuels will face new tariffs. That gives Canadian producers a competitive advantage, as Europe looks for reliable, low-carbon suppliers. In 2024, Canada-Denmark bilateral trade reached about $2.7 billion according to official figures, but the real significance lies in the kind of trade being developed. Green energy technology, hydrogen, and Arctic cooperation are all areas where Canada and Denmark are laying the groundwork for long-term influence.
What emerges are 2 competing futures. On one side, Donald Trump pursues influence with threats and alleged covert operations. On the other, Canada and Denmark build their position through cooperation, sustainable industries, and a steady link to Europe. Canada is not merely reacting to American pressure. By aligning with Denmark, it is creating strategic options that reduce dependence on the U.S. market and broaden its reach across the Atlantic. The future of the Arctic will not be defined by who makes the loudest claims, but by who builds the most resilient alliances.
On that front, Canada and Denmark already stand strong, showing that influence can be earned through partnership rather than force.
All right, now postal services worldwide are halting shipments to the United States.
An executive order signed by President Trump last month, goods coming in from abroad less than $800 will be slapped with country-specific tariff rates starting Friday.
It started with a single executive order. President Donald Trump abolished the de minimis exemption, the rule that had allowed parcels worth under $800 to enter the United States duty-free. By Friday, that exemption was gone. The impact was immediate. Postal services in Australia, India, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and across Europe suspended shipments to the United States. And the shock was felt in North America as well.
Now, as if Donald Trump's tariffs aren't inflicting enough pain, now Canadians running a small business are bracing for higher costs as the U.S. ends the exclusion from shipping fees.
Canada, America's closest trading partner, saw small businesses scrambling to keep sales flowing south of the border. Millions of parcels cross between the two countries each year, and the removal of this rule struck at the core of cross-border commerce. What was meant to protect America was in fact disrupting the continent's own supply chains.
The White House said the change was needed to protect American industries and block dangerous goods like fentanyl. But the first and hardest blow fell on American consumers and retailers.
The vast majority of my customer base is in the US. I can't pass this on to my customers. So as of last night, I've had to close my store completely.
Online sellers who rely on imports suddenly faced suspended shipments. Small shops that stocked foreign products prepared to raise prices or close their doors. For households, the costs arrive almost overnight. New duties are tied to country-specific rates ranging from 10 to 50%. NBC News reported they translate into flat fees of about $80 per item for countries with lower rates, $160 for mid-range, and $200 for the highest brackets. Analysts warned these changes could add up to $13 billion in extra consumer costs. Logistics firms also pulled back. DHL, one of the world's largest couriers, said it would stop accepting parcels bound for the United States until key details were clarified. Instead of securing America, the policy created delays, higher prices, and confusion at home.
While many countries froze shipments altogether, Canada chose a different approach. Canada Post confirmed it would not suspend service. Instead, it introduced a system to collect the new duties and transfer them to U.S. Customs. For Canadian parcels, most are now subject to a 35% tariff, reflecting the non-CUSMA rate set earlier in August. It is costly, but it preserves access to the market. This stood in sharp contrast with other partners. In Australia, small exporters halted sales to the United States because they could not guarantee what fees customers would face. In Europe, postal agencies admitted they needed more time and paused deliveries until new systems were built. Canada, by contrast, kept goods flowing. In the face of Trump's abrupt policy, Ottawa ensured businesses still had a path into their largest export destination.
The contrast is clear. Trump's decision was supposed to protect the United States, but it left American families and small shops paying more while major couriers suspended service. Canada, facing the same disruption, adapted quickly. By maintaining its postal link, it preserved market share while competitors in Europe and Asia were locked out. This is more than a technical fix. It reinforces Canada's role as a stable partner in North America. Prime Minister Mark Carney has argued that Canada will only sign agreements that serve its interests. That stance is reflected here. While others cut connections, Canada proved it could keep commerce moving under new rules. For the United States, the question is whether these tariffs strengthen or weaken the economy they were meant to defend. For Canada, the lesson is sharper. In the midst of global confusion, it found a way to turn crisis into opportunity, showing that resilience and pragmatism can be its greatest advantage.